This podcast and the experiences detailed reflect the stories and opinions of persons interviewed or members of the public and do not represent the viewpoints or positions of the New York State Office of Children and Family Services.
Welcome to the Rooted in Solutions, Growing Futures podcast. I'm Dr. Galen Gomes.
And I'm Tamara Rivers-Simmons. Before we begin this episode of our Elevating Fatherhood Voices series, we want to note that some of what you hear may be triggering.
Listen, if you are a father or you are supportive of fatherhood, this podcast is for you. Our goal is to uplift voices that have gone through the child welfare process and, as part of that, be honest about their struggles, what worked, and where systems could have done better.
We are discussing this as we try to improve our understanding and find proactive solutions. Let's begin today's conversation.
So much of what we go through in life can be based on our experiences growing up. Think about how your environment impacted everything, from the sports teams you root for to the books you read.
Today, we are diving into that even further to discuss where adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, these experiences include potentially traumatic events and include everything from experiences of witnessing violence to living in an environment where your safety and stability are compromised.
About 64% of adults say they have experienced at least one type of ACE before age 18. Research has shown ACEs have a lasting impact on adulthood, including health, stress, and even job potential.
I think that's really significant to note, all of those variables, especially when we think about child welfare and job potential. We know that poverty is often a topic that's brought up in terms of child welfare and neglect. And when we consider looking at parenting through the lens of ACEs, there are a myriad of ways that parents may be hindered from how they're able to show up in their parenting journey.
I agree. And I would also add that when we don't consider past traumas, or we don't consider past experiences, we also lose sight of the impact it has on a person's present.
Definitely. I think that's why it's so significant when we look at things through the trauma lens, that we're looking at asking that question of not what's wrong with you, but what has happened to you and what are you bringing into this space.
In addition to the team of experts you hear from each episode, Felix Garcia is a father whose story guides this podcast. After temporary custody of his daughter was given to her maternal grandfather, Felix began fighting to regain his rights. He says the court began limiting his visitation despite him doing everything he was told to do.
They would give me something to do more, I would lose more time. An accusation would be made, I would lose time until the point where it was down to 1 hour, 2 days a week, which was the lowest point, which is where a lot of the mental and the emotional come in. It definitely starts to play a factor on you when you feel like you're doing everything that you possibly can and you're still losing. It's very easy to feel like giving up, very easy to feel like, you're never going to win this. But it was definitely a struggle.
Felix says during that time, he also began to notice his daughter reacting negatively to being away from him.
During the worst of it, Felix says his visitation was down to 1 hour, 2 days a week.
I felt like the morals I was trying to instill in her were getting further and further from reach. And like I said, I felt like I wasn't being able to make an impact like I wanted to be able to impact, teach her the good morals that I wanted to teach her. And for a moment there, it just seemed like it was getting further and further off.
I have to say, for me, listening to Felix's voice, I consider two really significant things. Imagine his daughter being in that space of, my papi is telling me to do things this way. I miss my papi, and I have to show up in this way for other people. That's a lot of demands on a child. And then to only be able to parent in these pockets of time when you want to show up big and proud for your child and you're reduced to being a pocket parent.
Yeah. And I think what I like about what you shared is that we maybe don't always consider the
standpoint of the child. When we say child, we have to acknowledge that his daughter was very young. She was in the developmental stages, the impressionable stages. And these are the things that she's being left with. And that, again, when we talk about ACEs, it needs to be considered in her future development.
Exactly. Especially, I love that point that you said, because with ACEs, there's an intergenerational potential when we are considering people who are having these experiences and they're not being met with resources that can mitigate all of the factors that are within the ACEs spectrum. There is a significant potential for their child to go through the same variables that they went through. And then we see intergenerational familial substance use, mental health concerns, housing instability, and it can just go on and on and on.
So now, let's take some time, a little bit more about ACEs and bring in Dr. Brian Freidenberg. Dr. Freidenberg, thank you so much for joining us today. If you would start us off by please sharing a little bit about your journey as a social worker and a psychologist.
Hi, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So I grew up in South Buffalo area, and so part of what I saw in South Buffalo was disparities, economic disparities, racial disparities, and some socio-political disparities. And so I was young. I didn't even know what the words were for those things, but I knew I was interested in learning more about them. And so a pathway that I learned about was social work and also psychology. Social work appeals to me because it fits with my values as a person, the emphasis on culture, the emphasis on diversity, disparities, advocacy, child welfare, systems, community. And so I got into social work and I got my master's degree at Albany. And then I wanted a little bit more, though, in terms of therapy. So I went on and got my clinical psych doctorate at Albany, too. And so that's how I've gotten up to the point of being a therapist.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Doctor. I think you really gave us great education around why social work for you, and that gives us a great opportunity to really launch into the meat and potatoes of our interview with you today. Can you talk to us about the concept of the ACEs?
Yeah, so ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So these are traumatic events that happen for people during childhood or adolescence. They don't have to necessarily be experienced and defined as traumatic by the person who's having the trauma happen to them, but they have an impact. And so the impact is great because it has consequences in childhood and adolescence, but also into adulthood, and it can affect them as parents as well. And so some of the things that you might note that could be considered traumatic events, of course, would be neglect, abuse. Certainly, if there's substance use in the home, that's one of them. If there's violence in the home, that's another. Other pieces can include any kind of violence that's witnessed in the community. That can be at school, that can be in the neighborhoods, that can be in the home. Certainly any bigotry, discrimination, and also I would say any mental health distress that's happening within the home as well. Poverty, so low SES, of course, is also another huge factor that people, I think, sometimes overlook.
So as we talk about ACEs, in your opinion, are there particular ACEs that pose to be the most challenging to father in the future, to fatherhood?
I would say yes. I would say probably any type of abuse or neglect that's happening and the violence in the home, because it's also modeled that this is normative and that this is how it's supposed to be if you are a parent, or how you express or show love. And so those can be really detrimental. Another one definitely is substance use, and particularly if it's viewed as something that is, this is how we cope with emotions, this is how we deal with things, and if it's looked at as pretty much completely normative in the home environment, then I think it can have some consequences on fathers going forward.
Doctor, thank you for that Can you go a little deeper with that in terms of how that might show up, all of those factors might show up in the way that a father is parenting within his familial life?
Yeah, so some of the things that come to mind are attachment. So if we don't have a secure attachment when we're younger, if that is threatened or it's viewed as unsafe or unstable, then that can have an impact going forward as a parent, and particularly for fathers. Another piece is the discipline that's given toward children. It could be more harsh if a person's dealing with ACEs from their childhood and they're not really comfortable, nor do they have great ideas on how to be consistently deliver punishments that are consistent, and certainly the other part, which is reward, so rewarding the behavior that's desired, which has been shown to be more effective than punishment. They don't really have a playbook on this, so they're really just operating on what they've learned from what's been modeled for them and how they were treated. Mental health is another factor too, so if they're dealing with anxiety or depression from ACEs, that doesn't just go away if it's untreated, it stays, it even becomes stronger, and then what can happen is it's one, definitely passed down genetically for biological offspring, but also two, it is another thing that's modeled in the home. And three, it can affect their ability to parent clearly and carefully if they're dealing with a lot of anxiety, and also if they're dealing with depression. They might not feel motivated enough to do some of the things that are necessary to be the provider that they can be. I'll also say too, substance use again. So just to kind of go back to that this can be another way of learned coping for the parent and for fathers. And so it's not unlikely that they would turn toward that as parents themselves.
From what you've seen, what would you say are the most common comorbidities that are associated with fathers who are struggling?
So probably sounds like a broken record, but substance use disorder, anxiety, depression, and particularly for men, sexual dysfunction, which isn't talked about enough. And part of that has to do with sort of the made up social rules for men, which are to be quiet about things like that. You have to be careful about being vulnerable. You have to be careful about expressing particular emotions, unless it's anger. That's the only one that seems to be socially acceptable, but it's also incredibly toxic. And so there can also be some externalizing behaviors besides some of the substance use. There can be risky sexual behaviors and also just neglect of responsibilities at home, including for the children.
So are there any that you find fathers aren't aware that they hold, or that are coupled with it? Any comorbidity that fathers may not be aware of, like anything that's if made apparent to them would be like a light?
I think the anxiety and depression, because anxiety, I mean, it's a word we use a lot, and same thing with depression. I feel depressed. People will say it, I'm depressed today, but they don't necessarily mean it. They mean they're feeling down. But in my world, in the clinical world, depression and anxiety, like we're thinking anxiety disorders, we're thinking major depressive disorder. And that's something that I think in male culture is really difficult to talk about and to say, hey, this is happening to me. Part of that is because I think they think it's their fault, that we have these messages that you're supposed to be a particular way, you're supposed to not be nervous, you're supposed to be, quote, strong, and strong as it's defined for the culture is, for men, is you don't cry, you're not emotional, again, except for the anger, and you're certainly not vulnerable, and you don't talk about feelings, when in fact that actually hurts them, and it just further increases the stigma about true anxiety disorders and true major depressive disorder. If they learn that it's not their fault, that's a whole nother story. That opens it up to suggest you did nothing wrong. Right. This happens. These are health conditions that happen, and there's events that happen to you that had an impact on this. And we also don't have to necessarily go back and talk about those events. I think sometimes people are nervous about talking about what happened in childhood, or if they're telling on their family. But that's not exactly necessary to help them heal and to help treat anxiety and depression.
That's really good. Thank you, doctor. Listening to you, what I'm really hearing is that the patterns in terms of ACEs, we sometimes are not even aware of how much the patterns that we're exposed to in our childhood manifest in our parenting. And the words that you're saying, I know we just November was Men's Health Awareness Month, and there was a lot of conversation around men's mental health. And what I'm hearing you speak about is trauma and how it impacts a man's mental health, and then in turn their parenting. So can you just educate us a little bit deeper about how trauma and mental health go together in terms of how the fathers that we're interacting with are able to show up in their children's lives?
Yeah, I think the key is to, reduce stigma about what's happened to them and about mental health issues that may be there, that again are not their fault. So I think if you can do more of that, it helps, I think, the men feel a little bit more empowered and feel as though they can do something about it without feeling as if something they've done is a mistake or is wrong. Another thing I think can be helpful is bringing awareness to how they might be coping that isn't necessarily healthy for them. So with men, things that I think about are gambling, working, like being a workaholic, exercising, over-exercising in particular, substances, self-harm, which I'll come back to in a minute, isolating, like those might be looked at as, well, that's just how he is, or that's okay, that's what we do. But that's really not healthy for most people. And there are healthier options out there, which we can talk about a little bit later. But I want to talk about self-harm for a minute, because self-harm with men, particularly heterosexual men, looks different than self-harm for others. So with men, the self-harm, heterosexual, it can be cutting, burning, pinching, ingesting small amounts of chemicals. It can be those things. But substance misuse and fighting are also two ways that the self-harm does happen with men, where they might not even be consciously thinking too much about it, but it's a way to escape numbness. It's a way to feel something different. It's a way to get something else out that they might be feeling inside that they can't express any other way. So it comes out in those ways.
That was really, really helpful. I just have to say, and in thinking about our young adult fathers within our system of care who are parenting within our residential placements and other settings, you brought a great awareness around things that we can be more mindful of in terms of how they may be coping with their own mental health in a way that shows up as maladaptive to us.
Yes. Dr. Freidenberg, how do you begin the journey with someone who's just coming to realization that they're either harboring some of these things, they've experienced some things that they don't know is impacting how they parent? How do you begin that journey with them?
Yeah, I would say first is to listen to the words that they're using and use those words in the conversation. So if they're expressing some uncertainty about what way to go with parenting, or frustration about parenting, or somebody's interference with their ability to parent, I would want to spend more time talking about that and getting more information about that. I'd want them to start feeling as though they can use their voice. And what is also required is us to listen really carefully to what they're saying so that we can talk to them in a way to help motivate them for change. Because I do think that not everybody's in the same place for change, especially if they're just discovering this might be an issue. I'm not sure. Right. It'd be nice to throw a switch and say, okay, now you're ready to go, but it's not how it works. And so people are at different stages of change. And so I think assessing to see, okay, maybe they're at pre-contemplation where we're just starting to talk about some words or some things that they might start putting together and say, I think this is part of what's going on for me. Maybe, I'm not sure. That ambivalence is actually an okay thing. We don't have to try to convince them. We can let them sit in the ambivalence a bit. We can say, on the one hand, it sounds like you're experiencing these problems, but on the other hand, you're really not so sure. And you've gotten messages to say, you need to be strong. You need to pull yourself up. fathers need to do this. And so it sounds like there's some conflictual information there. And then they talk about that, and they talk about a little bit of the struggle with that. So I think that's important. Again, I would also talk to them about how it's not their fault if they have inherited things, and if they have been subjected to trauma and other things in the environment that shaped them into the person they are. I would then say, though, if it clicks for them and they see that and get it, that now they're at a crossroads where they can make a choice about getting some help for issues that we know is available and can benefit them, versus saying, I know that could help me, but I don't want to. Like, then that's really a different thing that we're dealing with. So, but giving them the options and telling them that there is a path that they can choose at this point, now that they know that they do have power to improve upon something if they want to.
That was really, really helpful, especially thinking about us on the front line, practitioners who are involved, opening up that awareness of the change cycle, right? Are there other strategies that you would recommend for a father who is recognizing that he's in this space of needing some support?
I do like podcasts a lot. Okay. So I do think there's great podcasts out there for men, particularly if they say something about men and mental health. Okay. Those are ones I would look into. There are other ones out there that are really not about that, but they will talk about, machismo or manliness or anger and why you deserve to be angry. This takes men into a different direction. They've already been told about anger, and they've in some cases have mastered this very well, but it doesn't help them as much. And one of the best solutions for anger is calmness. That's what we know now. It used to be express the anger, get it out more and more, and that actually doesn't help like we thought it did. And so it's really not to go in a direction of more and more anger, it's to go into a direction of more peace. And so some of the podcasts do a really good job of that if they are talking about mental health, because they can help a person understand about the stigma and about how, again, it's not their fault, and also that they're not alone. I think that's really important for men to know, that they're not alone. Another piece that helps them with not feeling alone is support groups for men. Some are online, some are in person, some are small, some are large, some are formal, some are less formal. So support groups, I think, can be helpful. And speaking of supports, there's also supports in the form of friends and family and coworkers or colleagues that I sometimes think we forget about. And men don't have to do it alone. They can use the network that they have around them for the supports. And in terms of friends, it's not that you need one friend to be everything or one friend to be your therapist. You might need a friend to, okay, I do want to talk about something. Another friend that I just want to be in the same space. Another friend like, okay, let's watch the game together. Another friend, let's laugh together. Let's talk about anything else together. It doesn't have to be one person serves all the needs. Right. So I think that helps too. And then there's also people who you could hold on to physically that you'd say, okay, I will call this person and arrange to meet them, but I would not do that for this person because they're not touchy-feely, or however they're going to conceptualize it. So making sure that you know who your friends, what their strengths are, so that you can call on the right people for what you need in that time is really, really important. And I would also say healthy hobbies, because they have some hobbies. And if their hobbies take up too much of their time or interfere with parenting or interfere with their ability to eat and take care of themselves like they normally would, then you want to go toward more healthy hobbies. And so thinking about things that can be good for them that are outlets, because there aren't enough promotions on doing things that are healthy for them that feel balanced. And so again, the friendships would be one of those things I would recommend as well, is to get connected, go around, go outside, go connect with people. And then when you have even conversations one-on-one with other men, you'll learn that, oh, gee, some of the stuff that I'm thinking about, this person's expressing to me, and that I'm really not alone.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I'm thinking about single dads right now, and the pressures, they must feel to always be on, to always be involved. And where do they get that outlet, or do they struggle with finding that outlet? With that in mind,
how would you respond to those dads who are looking for ways to get the outlet?
So here I would say there's a lot to learn. I thought I might not even mention this word because of the podcast, but there's a lot to be learned from women. So we see this especially, just as an example, when people retire, women do a much better job than men in terms of coping because they have a network of people. Their life goes on in other ways, and it feels very enriching. But for men, they don't really have that because work is such a big part of their world. At least they've been told it has been, and some of them have adopted that idea. So to think about how they can build a foundation of supports, and it doesn't necessarily have to be deep, deep supports, but just how can I connect with another human being so that I can feel a little bit more human and something more than a father? Because the father, the worker, those are two major responsibilities the person has, but they shouldn't have to define themselves in just those two ways. There's so much more than those two things. And so if they can really start thinking about themselves as more of a complete person, I think that would help them tremendously in terms of just growth as a complete person, instead of how can I be a better worker? How can I be a better parent? Even though those two are very valuable, there's more that can help them. And those other things can help them do both too. If they say, well, I still really value working and being a father, these other things will help you do that even better.
I really appreciate that. I really hear you speaking about the themes around building community. The healthy hobbies was a really great one. This brings me back a little bit, if you don't mind. The variables that you talked about within ACEs and walking us through with mental health, what are strategies? I recently became aware of the concept of urban ACEs, and being a Buffalo girl, as you are a Buffalo guy, I'm wondering how what you just educated us on would look in different settings, more specifically fathers who are in urban areas where there may be some additional variables that could be impacting their mental health and their access to coping strategies.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So when thinking about how it's nice to do the podcast and say all these wonderful things about options, but not everybody has equal access to these things, and the playing field is not even. So in some communities, it's easier to grab onto these things. A person might have the financial means to get these things. They might have transportation to get to these things. But that's not the same everywhere, of course. So if you think about urban settings, you're dealing with a lot of barriers that have been put up that have, again, nothing to do with the person who's in that setting. However, they could also start to take on that, well, I can't seem to get myself out of this. And it's like, well, hang on, that's something else working that has really little to do with you, but that can also prevent you from being an advocate for what you deserve. Because that's the other thing. Sometimes I think we think people who are in certain locations are entitled to have things, but everyone else isn't. So you have to be above a certain SES. You have to live in a certain neighborhood. You have to go to a certain school to get those kinds of things. But in our field in social work, we don't really buy into that. And we believe that while that is a reality, there's no reason we can't advocate as a community. And so for the one person to know that, in this case, he has the right to have access to some of these things, and that it isn't necessarily his problem that he cannot have the access. It's a systemic problem, and I know that that's bigger than what we're talking about. But if that person is known, if that person speaks on it and says, I would like this too, I would like some of these privileges. There's a support group for men, but it's not anywhere in my area. How can I access a group like that? Can we get one group like that in this community? That could start those things to happen. And particularly if it is in a community where people care. And there could be people from outside the community who might not care about a particular community, like people who are in the suburbs who could say, well, that's not happening in my community, so it's not really relevant. I don't really think about it. Of course you don't think about it. But what about the people who are in that community, and how do they feel about having some of those same types of things that maybe are easier to access in other communities. So I would think about that. I would also think a little bit about the overexposure to violence in lower SES communities, because it is relevant, it does matter, it's still neglected, and it also has a tremendous impact on parenting. It has a tremendous impact on children who will one day become parents. And violence as the norm has been shown never to be healthy in any context, whether a person is seen to be rewarded for the violence or punished for the violence, or even like a neutral stance for the violence. This was done with Albert Bandura's work at Stanford. They showed that regardless of if people were rewarded, punished, or even neutral when someone did a violent act, it was still repeated by children when they would see it. Violence is one of those few things that is repeated when seen, regardless of the consequence of it. So that's something that's also quite relevant. And one other thing I'll mention too is something that is real. It does exist. It has existed for a long time. And that is when you're talking about urban settings too, you're talking about other isms that affect that community. Right. And so just a simple one, racism, alive and well, very transparent. All you have to do is turn on the news. It's there, so that even people say, "Oh, it's not there," or they only want to talk about extreme cases. Yeah. It's alive and well, and that does have an impact. And it's okay to converse about it. It's okay to have these conversations and bring it to light so that people can change parts of these systems that are also maintaining racism and disparities that are based on racism. So I think that that's influential too in the urban settings.
I really appreciate that, Tamara, you raised that, and Dr. Freidenberg for addressing it, because one of the questions I was going to ask next that you started addressing is, with the consideration of there are variant environments, is there a resource, a recommendation of a support group that you have for individuals who need it?
I don't. Why? There's not enough groups, first of all. Second of all, even when you do have enough groups, there is the problem of men saying, I don't know if I want to even open up to one person. Right. And you're telling me to go to a setting where there's going to be multiple people who I don't know, who, by the way, are men. Right. And if they think like I do, then they might be judging, because I know I'm judging. So that is something that is a bigger thing to work through. It would be nice if we could have one conversation with somebody and say, yes, that could be there. However, the real courage and strength that we've been told is don't do that, is actually doing that, is actually being vulnerable. And it would be nice if that can happen. And sometimes it can happen with just one conversation, but it seems so much bigger that we just have to have repeated conversations at various levels, and not just with people who are thinking about getting into a group, but even people who would think about creating a group, because there's people in my field who wouldn't do a group with men because they're like, they're not going to attend. I'm like, well, that attitude that you have that they aren't going to attend can also be changed a little bit by how you speak about it, yeah, and how you package it. So I think if we talk about groups for men a little bit differently, that would be helpful. And I think it would be very valuable to acknowledge and validate. Of course, it's going to feel uncomfortable because we've all been taught that. And if a male can say that to another male and say, I've attended the same workshops you have all my life on what it's supposed to be like to be a man and how it's all made up, but also how that impact is real, and it does influence us in terms of how we talk about ourselves and to each other. So validating, but at the same time, letting them know it's made up.
Yeah.
So start breaking away some of these made up rules.
I appreciate it.
I do, definitely, which makes me want to ask maybe kind of like a feel-good question. Dr. Freidenberg, can you, without breaking confidentiality, of course, which we know you would never do, can you give us an example or talk to us of maybe a success story of a father that you, being conscious of all the things that you've educated us about today, have walked someone through their journey and come to what would be their definition of success?
I would say, I don't have a case in particular that I would share. I did think of, I can think of a few, but somebody out there, if they're listening, they might know a little something about it. And so I don't want to do that. But what I can say is that when I have had cases with men, because I work with the courts too, I work with families, I work with couples, I work a lot with children. And so learning about those systems help me when I'm working with fathers. And so what I do see is fathers who come in and they do feel pulled in multiple directions, and it is work and it is raising the child, and there's very little time for anything else. And again, I have to say with all respect to women, because this sounds similar, right? Like this sounds like a thing. And so again, I just want to go back to what I have told some men is that there is a game plan for this. There is a way to do this. It's just you're a man in that situation, and you might not have been taught that you're allowed to have additional resources, that you're allowed to connect on these things, that you're allowed to complain, you're allowed to say that you want to talk to friends about things, you're allowed to say, I don't know what to do sometimes, or I want to throw up my hands. So I think when they come in normally for me and we're working on issues related to custody or good care for the child or co-parenting, I see a lot of that, the co-parenting piece. We want to make sure that we resolve as best we can issues with the other parent, because that interferes with the ability to be a quality parent. So that's one piece that I try to work on with men to resolve that as best as we can. Another thing is it's not going to be perfect, and you're going to have to compromise. That is what it means to be a parent. And if you're a good parent, you care about that. And it also bothers you a little that you have to compromise. That's okay. And then a third thing is to reach out for any resources you have, even if it is sometimes in cases with some of the men, it's their parents, and letting them in and talking to them about, hey, I don't know what to do, or I'm having a childcare issue. That's okay. Talk about it. See where it goes. See what resources are available to you by mentioning some of the issues that you're having or concerns that you have, so that others can offer what they can offer. And that's the other thing I say to men I work with, which is please allow people to offer you what they can give. And if they're offering it, you can say yes. You don't have to feel guilty about it. It's not impolite to say, yes, I'll do that. Thank you for that. It's actually honoring what they're offering and giving them that ability to contribute in a way that's meaningful for them, that ultimately might be meaningful for you and your child.
Dr. Freidenberg, you've shared so much with us, gave us so many jewels, and for our listeners. And keeping in line with tomorrow, I'm going to ask you one last feel-good question, and that is, you and your professional work, you do so much to help others. For practitioners like you, how do you sustain yourself?
Balance. Have to have balance. And so for me, I have to know when I'm at my limit, and I have to say, if I am not functioning at 100% or close to it, doesn't have to be perfect, but give me 95%, then it means I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm working too hard in one other area. And so I have to be a good therapist. I have to be a good person. I'm a father myself. I have to be a good father. I have to be a good partner to my partner. And so if I start to feel like something's crumbling in one of those areas, I know, hang on. You can't just tell clients about these things and about balance. You have to do the same. And it will help me to enjoy my professional work, my relationship with my daughter, my relationship with my partner, my relationship with friends. I do the friend thing too. It's critical. And so I think when I start to feel those things, I think a little bit about the word balance. And I don't expect it to be 50-50. I just think instead of 90 in one area and 10 in another, or another 90 and a 5 and a 5 in a couple areas, how can I start to bring them a little bit more in balance, even if they're never 50-50, because it's really tough to have everything be equitable. And also, I like to allow myself to give more at certain times of the year to certain things. Sometimes my daughter needs me more than maybe my work might need me, and that's okay. And sometimes it's vice versa. So one thing I wanted to mention, too, just so that you are aware, when I was asked to come and talk about this, my first thought was, how can I talk about this as a feminist? Because I am a feminist. And I thought, actually, this is probably a good thing to hear from a feminist, because even somebody who's got feminist ideas, it doesn't mean that it's just about women. It's about equality and about accessibility for people regardless of gender. And so thinking about this concern about men and with parenting and about ACEs from a perspective of everybody needs to be heard, regardless of what society tells us related to gender factors and what we're allowed to do and what we're supposed to do with the made-up rules. So I thought that was very interesting for me to mention that piece too, so that people know, okay, this is somebody who identifies as a feminist who can talk about these issues, I think, pretty clearly, and hopefully it helps people.
Oh, very clearly.
Dr. Freidenberg, thank you so much. I know personally I feel very, very enlightened. Just one more question that we've asked our guests is, what's next for you as we move forward? What are you looking forward to in your journey as a social worker, psychologist, moving forward?
Yeah, it's something that I just started, which is a support group for therapists. So thinking about even the last question I just got about, for me, like, what do I do? And I was thinking about other therapists in the field and how inundated they are. And so I thought maybe I should think about a support group for therapists. So we just started that. We're eight weeks into it, and it's gone well. So I'm glad we're doing it.
Awesome. Good to hear.
Again, thank you so very much, Dr. Freidenberg. We appreciate you, and thanks for all the wisdom you shared with us.
Thank you. We really appreciate our time with you today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Galen, I feel like we learned a lot during this episode, and going back to what we talked about in the intro, how important it is for us as practitioners to be mindful of the need to create resources that can act as mitigating factors for the myriad of areas that are impacted by ACEs. We know that when we look at the variables, we have to consider substance abuse, mental health, physical health as well, and how those factors go on to impact someone's parenting. And one thing I kind of think about it is, if you're not well, you're not able to work. And if you're not able to work, you're not able to meet the basic needs of yourself, let alone a vulnerable person that you are responsible for as an individual.
Yeah, I agree. I really appreciated the opportunity to be able to highlight the needs to talk about, trauma, men's health, things of that nature, and to be able to provide some coping strategies and some resources for listeners to be able to indulge themselves in, when there's a need. So I really appreciated Dr. Freidenberg for that.
Likewise. A lot of rich opportunities and awareness of how we can grow and move forward with this critical knowledge.
Felix's story also touches on many of the points Dr. Brian Freidenberg made.
In that case, Felix began noticing signs his daughter was being negatively impacted by the custody battle. He says this improved after he gained more visitation rights.
That concludes today's episodes of the Rooted in Solutions, Growing Futures podcast.
Before we go, we want to thank Dr. Brian Freidenberg and Felix Garcia for their insight into a very difficult topic. If you or someone you know is going through something similar, know we are here to help. Please visit our website, ocfs.ny.gov.
There, you will also find Felix Garcia's full interview, as well as other podcast resources. We'll see you on the next episode.